The birth of the concept, the end of the 20th century, the end of modernity. The 20th century has ended, but it is only now that we are truly beginning to realize and to understand this fact. The 20th century was the century of ideology. If in the previous centuries religion, dynasties, states, classes, and nation-states played an enormous role in the lives of the people and societies, then in the 20th century politics had shifted into a purely ideological realm. Having redrawn the map of ethnicities, civilizations, and the world in the new way, on the other hand, political ideologies represented early and deeply rooted civilizational tendencies. On the other hand, they were completely innovative. All political ideologies having reached the peak of their dominion and influence in the 20th century were the product of new modern era embodying its spirit, albeit in different ways and under different symbols. Today we are rapidly leaving this era. Thus everyone speaks more and more frequently of the crisis of ideology, or even the end of ideology. For instance, the existence of a state ideology is explicitly denied in the Constitution of the Russian Federation. It is time to address this issue more closely. The three main ideologies and their fate in the 20th century. The three main ideologies of the 20th century were liberalism, left and right, communism, including both Marxism and socialism, along with social democracy, and fascism, including National Socialism and other varieties of the Third Way, Franco's National Syndicalism, Perón's Justicialism, and Salazar's regime, etc. Now it's important to point out here that a lot of people would say that socialism, communism, they're two different things. I mean, I haven't really looked into it, but there are people who would say that this categorization is inaccurate, and some would even say that Marxism is also separate from these two as well. But when it comes to fascism, assuming that fascism, National Socialism, and Third Position are all the same thing, that's actually incorrect. I think fascism and National Socialism are like two completely different ideologies, and people tend to confuse them together because they're used in tandem very often. And Third Positionism also is distinct from fascism and National Socialism. So this categorization, assuming that National Socialism and Third Positionism are a subset of fascism, I think it's actually wrong. I think it's actually more appropriate to say that National Socialism and Fascism are a subset of Third Positionism, which he calls the Third Way. So this category, I think it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, sorry for interjecting, let's continue. They fought among themselves to the death, creating in essence the entire dramatic and bloody political history of the 20th century. It is logical to number these ideologies or political theories based in part on their significance as well as in the order of their occurrence, as was done above. The first political theory is liberalism. It arose first as early as the 18th century and turned out to be the most stable and successful ideology, having ultimately prevailed over all its rivals. Well, not for long, as we can see that today the liberalists, the quote-unquote liberal Western democracies are basically collapsing because of usury, because of interest, because of credit card debt, and all those other things. So, yeah. Anyway, let's continue. As a result of this victory, it proved, among other factors, the justification of his claim to be the entire legacy of the Enlightenment. Today, it is obvious that it was liberalism that was the best fit for modernity. However, this legacy was disputed earlier, dramatically, actively, and at times convincingly by another political theory, communism. It is reasonable to call communism, much like socialism, in all its varieties, the second political theory. It appeared later than liberalism as a critical response to the emergence of bourgeoisie capitalist system, which was the ideological expression of liberalism. And finally, fascism is the third political theory. As a contender of its own understanding of modernity spirit, many researchers, particularly Hannah Arendt in particular, reasonably considered totalitarianism one of the political forms of modernity. Fascism, however, turned toward the ideas and symbols of traditional society. In some cases, this gave rise to eclecticism, in others to the desire of conservatives to lead their own revolution instead of resisting another's, and leading their society in the opposite direction, such as Arthur Moeller van den Broek, Dmitry Merezhkovsky, and so on. Fascism emerged later than other major political theories and vanished before them. The alliance of the first political theory with the second political theory, as well as Hitler's suicidal geopolitical miscalculations, caused it to expire prematurely. Now, I actually think this is wrong because in the modern day, you can see a lot of fascist regimes still existing. I mean, just look at Israel. It's basically a fascist country, specifically made for the Jews. So, to claim that fascism basically vanished is completely incorrect. And I think you can even say the same for countries like Saudi Arabia, which also have, well, I guess you could call it a theocracy, but I think it has also very strong elements of fascism in it. I mean, you could even say China has a lot of fascistic ideology underpinning its current government structure. And I would even say Iran is also a very fascist country. I mean, a lot of people would categorize it because it has a lot of principles that overlap, so I don't think this is entirely accurate, though. The third political theory was a victim of homicide, or perhaps suicide, not living long enough to see old age and natural decay, in contrast to the ideology of the Soviet Union. And I'm interjecting here. Again, I think it's wrong because there's a lot of, according to Dugin's definition of third political theory. Oh, sorry, wait a minute. Sorry for the interruption. So the third political theory was a victim of homicide, or perhaps suicide, not living long enough to see the old age and natural decay, in contrast to the ideology of the Soviet Union. I was explaining before that the reason why this is wrong, because if you look at Dugin's own definition of the third political theory, which is basically, he's saying National Socialism, Fascism, third position. He's basically putting that all in one category. And then he's saying that it was a victim of homicide or suicide. But we can see that what he would categorize as a third political theory kind of country, like Israel or Iran or Saudi Arabia, those countries persist and they're actually pretty powerful these days. I mean, even Japan is kind of like a third position country, so there's a lot of countries that are, you could say very reasonably, are third position, and not only do they exist today, they're actually extremely powerful, both economically and politically. So, and especially Israel, you know, he would never say that the state of Israel is like a victim of homicide or suicide. In fact, it's only growing stronger each year. So anyway, let's continue. Therefore, this bloody vampiric ghost tinged with an aura of absolute evil is attractive to the decadent tastes of post-modernity, and is still used as a boogeyman to frighten humanity. With its disappearance, fascism cleared the field for the battle between the first and second political theories. This battle took the form of the Cold War and gave birth to a strategic geometry of the bipolar world, which lasted for nearly half a century, but by 1991, the first political theory, liberalism, had defeated the second political theory, socialism. This marked the global decline of communism. As a result, by the end of the 20th century, liberal theory is the only one remaining of the three political theories of modernity that is capable of mobilizing the vast masses throughout the entire world. Yet now that it is left on its own, everyone speaks in unison about the end of ideology. Why?